Hi, it's Cara Brown, and this is Watercolor Conversations. It's a place where I share my love of watercolor and my seeking, my teaching, my discoveries, the connections I see, and just in general what it's like to be alive at this time here on planet Earth. I hope that this meets a part of you that's longing to be met. Thanks for being here. Hello, it's Cara, and I am here with that episode that I've been promising, a practical one about composition. The funny thing about doing this in a podcast episode where you're just getting this information in through your ears is that it's really a visual thing I'm talking about here, putting elements together for painting. At the same time, I'm thinking that it might be interesting. It might stimulate your imagination a little bit more. You might have to envision it yourself rather than being given my version of visual composition. This is a collection of thoughts. I am self-taught mostly. I'm not formally trained for sure in the art world. There are no rules I'm going to tell you need to follow. These are just some things that I think about, and I want you to just take it for what it's worth and not feel like this is the way that it's done. Composition is a huge part of what it is that we do, and it doesn't actually have anything to do specifically with watercolor. So here goes. I'm going to start with my word nerdness. Composition is the noun. The verb is to compose, and the Latin root of this is com, which means together or with, and pose means to put or to place. So to compose is to put or place together. The definitions that you would expect for me to be talking about are to create with care and thought, like composing music or writing a poem or painting a picture. Another definition is to form a whole by arranging parts, especially artistically. That's exactly what we're talking about. But there's another compose that intrigued me, and it's the reflexive form of the verb, to compose oneself. And this is to collect yourself, to settle yourself. And I thought, well, that's telling, because when I'm working on a composition, when it's right, there's nothing niggling at me, there is kind of a calmness in me, like oh yeah, that's what I've been hoping for. So there's a reflexive version of the verb that the art does, that it's just, or the potential art does, is that it settles itself when it gets to the right spot for our own sensibilities anyway. So when I think about composition, when we're composing something, I look at it kind of in two big buckets. And one of them is the overall shape, and the other is what's inside that shape. So the overall shape is, if we're going to use photo references, is how we crop. Or if you're painting plein air, or drawing plein air, making a piece of art out in the world, that's a huge piece of what you have to decide. And that's how you're going to bound what it is that you're doing. Where are you going to draw the lines, so to speak, that this is what's in and this is what is not. The shape that takes and the relationship between the subjects inside that shape and the edges, that's all that dynamism is all part of composition as well. The most standard and normal shape for a piece of visual art, like a painting or a drawing, is rectangular. Landscapes are often horizontal, but also vertical landscapes are kind of more portrait mode. But when you are composing something in Microsoft Word, you can either be in landscape mode or portrait mode. And it's just directly related to what it is that we do when we're painting. Those rectangles can take various shapes. I do standard, often full sheet of watercolor, which is, I think it's a 4:3 ratio of length to width or width to length. A lot of my work is that. That's very classic. But a lot of my work is square. I love squares. Just love them. They range from 7 inches square to 40 inches square, and square is square. I just love square. Some things just need to be square. But for the rectangles, I also like really skinny compositions, like 2-to-1 or even a more narrow than that. For a cluster of grapes hanging down, or even I did one vertical piece that was a cascade of roses, kind of almost like a waterfall of roses coming down. And then a horizontal skinny, like branch of a crabapple tree or the surface of a lily pond. You really kind of get the sense of the expanse without being distracted by what's above and below. So those are interesting shapes too. There are even some paintings that are round. Paintings, when I say paintings, I mean two-dimensional art. Claude Monet did several paintings of his lily ponds in round shapes. And the artist that probably is the biggest inspiration in my development of myself is Joseph Raphael, or was Joseph Raphael. He's passed away now. He did some round paintings toward the end. And I have a painting that's basically round. It's not framed round, but the corners are black, and it's my clock painting. It's called Eternal, and it's in the gallery on my website under Paris. So there's something compelling too about round. Round is how we look through a telescope or through a hole in the wall. There's a peering into that we do when we look through a round shape. That's interesting too. And then there's what we put inside the shape, that other piece, the elements, and whether or not the elements touch the edge, what kind of shapes are created around the main subjects of our art, what we call the negative space, and whether or not the elements touch each other, whether they overlap. All of those kind of relational pieces are super interesting to consider. If things are just barely touching, I think that's called a tangent, and sometimes it's deemed not ideal to have that kind of thing going on. I don't know all the rules about this, and I don't follow them. I just know what's pleasing and what's not. So take all this with a grain of salt. What I think makes, for me, a successful painting is to have the contrast, light and dark, the contrast with color, like opposite the color wheel. If you've got a lot of what we would call warm colors, to have a little bit of like a blue or a green in there to give a little rest and a little surprise, or muted colors and vibrant colors together. If everything's all vibrant, a little muted color gives your eye a little place to rest. And then as far as pattern and shape goes, to have large shapes and small shapes, to have intricate detail and expanse of sort of something smooth, to have some linear shapes, some sort of what we would call kind of more man-made shapes and natural shapes too, like to have a fence in the background behind some flowers. Now, there's one of my paintings that I didn't realize it until I was in the middle of painting it, that there was a cyclone fence pattern, or no, it was a chicken wire fence pattern behind there. All these things having this kind of sameness, or rather avoiding sameness, having these different elements in the art to give a little bit of unexpectedness to the viewer. You can also consider how much space you give the subjects inside the shape. So that's sort of how these things relate to one another, the outer bounds and what's inside. Sometimes you need to bring a side of the composition in closer to the subject in order to kind of hold it, to give it a little, like it's not just sort of hanging out there without the support of the side. And sometimes you need to give it a little breathing room. There was an artist who used to like to paint all kinds of wild, crazy creatures, and she painted the profile of a lizard. Together we were looking at this and realized that if there was a lot of empty space, there was no background, it was just this profile of a lizard on the white watercolor paper, the lizard needed to have space in the direction that it was looking in order to have it feel alive. Because if the edge of the paper was too close to the nose or the tip of the face of this lizard, it died. It just was not an interesting composition, but it got really intriguing when that line was out there further, like, what is this lizard looking at? So just consider how much space is around the things that you're including in your composition. I spend hours and hours composing in Photoshop. I love to get lost in this world. If there's any part of the art creation process for me that is free and timeless, that I lose myself, it's this. I take several photos of the subject that were taken all at the same time, hopefully even in the same direction facing the light. Because if the light's different, you can't really include them unless you need to redo that, and that's just beyond me. I cannot make up where the light is. It's just not within my capacities. But I take pieces like a bud and some leaves, or there's some ugly dirt on the ground that I really don't want to paint dirt. Sometimes I do. I've painted plenty of dirt. So I just like pull pieces together and tuck them underneath and play and play and play. And sometimes I've done this and spent hours and hours and hours on something, and then it just, nothing happens, and I never paint it. So you never know. But what I suggest is that you play. There are other tools you can use. I think there's something called Canva, an application. I know Photoshop so well, and I just figure, why spend the time to learn something else when it's just fine and it's my world and I love it. But digital tools they're available there for us to play with composition. I don't start painting until I'm sure that I have the right composition. I know what the background's going to be. That's my process. Plenty of people don't do that. Plenty of people just charge in and then kind of sort of do a design build, to use a construction term, as they're painting, and kind of figure it out as they go. And that's not my way. I like to do all that messing around digitally, and then I bring it through rather with paint and water on paper. It can turn out differently than I expect, the colors and the lights and the darks and how it actually ends up. But the basic structure of it, I have already decided. I hope this is helpful. I hope it's interesting. I hope it has stimulated your thought and your imagination. And what I suggest you do is use, even just simply on a smartphone, a photo editing app can give you the chance to saturate color, to change the light and dark, and you can, of course, crop. So those are things that you can play with. If you know Photoshop or other kinds of tools where you can take elements from one file and put them on the other and resize them and do all kinds of fancy things, then even better. But play, have fun. This is just such a big, huge part of my process that I adore. And when I get a little niggling of something I want to do, it's like I can't wait to dive in and just be in that world and create my composition and then get going painting. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for your patience waiting for this one. I am wide open for suggestions if there's aspects of the watercolor process, especially as I do it, that you'd like to hear from me about. Please ask. Go to my website and send me an email, and we'll see what we can do. All right. Thanks again. Until next time. Bye-bye.